Welcome to Homemeans, where the heart of Nevada comes alive. I'm your host, Heather Brown, and this is a place where we uncover the real stories behind the people who make our state extraordinary. From unforgettable adventures to everyday moments that shape us, this podcast is all about the voices, the faces, and the experiences that make Nevada truly unique. Let's dive in and get to the heart of what home means. Welcome to another episode of Homemeans. Today I have the former speaker and former U.S. Attorney, Jason Frierson.
Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate that. This is your first podcast, you said.
It is my first podcast.
That's exciting.
It is really exciting.
Well, the podcast is called Homemeans, so I really just want to do a deep dive on what the state means to you. And I'd like to start with, we know you didn't grow up here,
Right.
Compton, right?
Right.
But you've poured a lot into the state. So I'm curious, what made Nevada feel like that place for you?
Well, I moved to Nevada in 1988. I got a football scholarship to attend University of Nevada, Reno. But my grandparents had made Nevada their home, and they were here in Las Vegas since the 70s. And I'll never forget, being recruited by the Hall of Famer Chris Ault and coming to play football in Nevada. And ever since, Nevada's been just wonderful to me. I can't imagine another state where this little kid from the inner city can come in and really get a chance to meet some people and make a difference. And it really exposed me to people like Frankie Sudell Pop, a former attorney general, and Brian Sandoval, who was attorney general and hired me, and I worked for Brian Sandoval as a deputy attorney general. I can't imagine another state where you could really get to know folks like that, where you could call Richard Bryan out of the blue and have a career advice conversation with him. He didn't know me from Adam, but he took the call, gave me some advice, and I think those things kind of eventually launched my political career. But I had always been interested in advocacy, and it just happened, but I couldn't imagine it happening in another place.
I think that's so crazy that you mentioned Senator Bryan and being able to call him. I literally called him today.
Oh, nice.
I'm not kidding. I called him to say thank you. He had given me some advice on this podcast. He said that some of the best things he ever did when he was in office were the things he didn't do. And as soon as I heard him say that, it really stuck with me. And I got a nasty text message the other day, and I was just going to be like, I'm sorry you feel that way, right? But then I was like, or I could just not say anything, and it actually is the same outcome. And it just Senator Bryan's voice was in my head, so I called him today to thank him on that. So I think that's so funny that you said that.
No, it's great. I mean, I called him out of the blue when I was at the Attorney General's office and I wanted more trial experience, and he heard me out and made some suggestions. And I know he had been such a huge public servant his whole career, both as a public defender and as a district attorney, that I just thought he would be the perfect resource. And what grace to take my call. And obviously, since then, our relationship has flourished. But I think Nevada is unique in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, so you grew up in California, got recruited, came here. Nevada and its uniqueness, that stickiness,
Right.
that ability just to pick up the phone. And I tell people that all the time. I was like, yeah, just call him. And they're like, but we need to yeah, just call him. And I love that is what you felt when you went to school, and you're still feeling it today.
Even after arriving, and I played football. I suffered a career-ending knee injury, and got involved in student government just because I was bored and interested. And in that way, I ended up, meeting Kenny Gwynn. And, when he was on the board, again, Joe Crowley was a role model of mine. He's the reason I went to law school. And, having that opportunity to get involved. Stephen Horsford, one of our Congress members, served with me in student government at UNR. He was vice president. I think it's been a wonderful experience, and for me to be able to have lived in Reno for 10 years and see the state, and work at UNR and help kids get to college and serve as their advisor when I was at UNR, and then be able to come down to UNLV for law school. I've just been able to see the whole state and see it in a light that I think very few people are able to see it.
And I love that you went to Boyd. I was just touring it yesterday, actually, just check in on the students, and I love seeing all of our homegrown talent from our law school stay here, and so it's really amazing. So we know Nevada politics and public life often move very fast, and you're constantly under pressure. So I'm curious, in your early days of your career, what helped you develop a sense of, you know, good judgment and steadiness?
Well, I think that when I left California to move to Reno, moving from a big city to a smaller town, and being on the football team, you recognize quickly that you're being watched and that you have to be conscious of what you do, whether it's perceived to be in public or not. You're always being watched, and I think I just developed a tendency early on to be mindful that things I do reflect not only on myself but people are similarly situated, and you know. I just wished my mother a happy birthday on Facebook, her 80th birthday, but I was raised in a household where we had city council members come over, and I think that civic engagement started at an early age, and I've just always, ever since then, even in high school, had a spirit of advocacy that I've been allowed to explore in undergrad, at Boyd, and since then in the legislature.
And I'm actually really curious. So you think it was the proximity to all these different community leaders that gave you living examples to see? I mean, they're at your dining room table. It wasn't something you just saw on TV.
Right. No, it absolutely gave me a sense of obligation to serve, and and to stay engaged and to be aware, and that's just continued on from my youth all the way through today. I've just been really, really fortunate to have some opportunities to have an altruistic calling and purpose, and it's always been what drives me.
And I think that's just another really good example. We say a lot, you can't be what you don't see, and those clever posters we see on the wall.
Right.
But that really is true when you think about, how do you know that you can be a public servant if you don't see good people holding those positions, and you can see the tangible efforts that they're putting in, and you can see the outcomes.
Right. I remember in elementary school saying I was interested in going to medical school and having a teacher say, how about you start a trade? And even at a young age, that outraged me that my teacher would suggest that. And so, I actually ended up being waitlisted to medical school. I think that everybody's better off that I chose a different path. But, I just refused to take no for an answer.
Yeah. Shame on that teacher.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I have a lot of teachers that I can look back on, and it's like, thank goodness they saw something in me that I didn't quite see yet, right? And they really, cultivated that, because teachers play such an important role, and as a society, we really do need to celebrate them more.
100%.
And think about that.
I graduated from high school in 1988, and my government teacher from high school, to this day, we're friends on Facebook, and she held me to a high standard. We had a lot of things going on in student government when I was in high school, and she held me responsible for doing the right thing. And again, we're still friends on social media to this day.
I love that. So you've worked on both sides of the justice system. And how did those experiences shape the way you think about fairness and accountability, especially in a state so diverse as Nevada?
Well, I think that when you look at the justice system, there's an assumption that folks want to be anti-law enforcement, and I always say my mom lives in this community. I want the police to come when we call. But you also want it to be measured and prioritized. So you even when I was at the Attorney General's office, one of the things that drove me was putting a lot of energy into going after really dangerous conduct, but being really, really creative if it wasn't real dangerous conduct. And that requires a kind of an openness to a case-by-case approach. I looked at justice that way as a DA, as a public defender, as U.S. attorney. And I think it's important when you're in those roles that you have a responsibility, to deliver justice, and you don't go into it shirking that responsibility. But you also want to be balanced and think about the folks that didn't have resources that might have made a bad decision, whereas some other folks might have had the resources to have protection when they made a bad decision. And I think it has made me a better professional on both sides of that of the justice system.
I always think about the justice statue, and she's blindfolded, and I've always interpreted that as I'm hopeful that people are just following the law and
Right.
executing the law to its letter of the law,
Right.
and they're not bringing their own biases in. And it sounds like you have to take some of these extenuating circumstances into account, because not everything is apples to apples. Not
Right.
everybody's starting from baseline zero.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, I think it is worthwhile to be creative, because if you can create an environment where you're reducing recidivism, you're actually saving the community money and resources, but also keeping the community safe. So you want to be open to different ways to resolve cases that ultimately protect the community, but also allow for growth, which, is why we believe in second chances. And in everything that I've done in my public career, it's been surrounding being open to giving people second chances, but also recognizing that you have to, keep the community safe.
I really like that, and that's always our hope, right? I like that you said, your family lives here. When you call the police, you want them to show up.
Absolutely.
When someone has done something wrong, you want them to receive the punishment that is equal, but they need to be represented fairly.
Right.
All things need to be taken into consideration.
Right.
And I went through Leadership Las Vegas, and I had an opportunity to visit multiple different types of courts.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really eye-opening for me, because one court is not the same as the next court.
Right.
And it's not until you actually realize that we have incredible programs for people who have lost their way. And because at the end of the day, we want them back.
Right.
I've visited the prisons where they're training them to how to be HVAC technicians,
Mm-hmm.
and because they are going to get out. We want them to have a skilled trade, and I have so much empathy for this sector of our community, because it is so important for the functionality of where we're heading.
No, those trades opportunities are invaluable. The steelworkers have, a wonderful program, and they hire ex-felons and train them up on how to do the trade and make a living. So we want to make sure that folks, once they've paid their debt to society, can safely reintegrate into society in a productive way. And that's just one of those things that's been a priority for me as well.
So you were an elected official. How did your leadership style morph being the speaker?
Honestly, I watched former leaders. I watched even as far back as Bill Raggio. I was his bank teller in Reno back when I was in college. I actually accidentally carded him once. I didn't know who he was at the time, and my manager told me not to ever do that again. But he was graceful. I watched Joe Dini, but then I also watched Richard Perkins and Barbara Buckley, and even served with Marilyn Kirkpatrick and learned a great deal. And so there were some mistakes that I was able to avoid, but you still, there's a bumpy road, and you learn by making mistakes. I always say, especially in leadership, you can make good decisions and bad decisions, but the worst thing you can do is make no decision. And so you learn from mistakes. I think I learned early on to be inclusive and collaborative, and I met with stakeholder groups once a week during session to make sure that I was making informed decisions. I was very upfront about legislation that was going to pass, legislation that was not going to pass. I think that allowed for stakeholders to focus their energy on the stuff that had a shot, but collaborating both with the minority leadership and the executive leadership proved to be invaluable. I think being able to sit down with the governor, and I served under then Governor Sandoval as well as then Governor Sisolak, and being able to sit down and talk with them and have honest conversations about priorities, I think was important, and allowed me to have relationships both with Democrats and Republicans, with the majority and the minority, across the board, and have a recognition that we all are public servants and we want to have a meaningful, fulfilling existence here. So how can we make that happen?
I really appreciate that approach to it, because especially in a state like Nevada, yes, we have a two-party system, obviously, but it's so much more than that. At the end of the day, I really believe that there is a Nevada. Mm-hmm. We are all Nevadans, and we're all trying to do the best thing. We might come from it in different ways, but I do feel like that spirit is there.
I agree 100%. I think that in my experience, we have agreed almost always on where we want to go, just not how to get there necessarily. And if you go into it with that approach, you can find that common ground. You're open-minded to finding that common ground. And, for me, whether it was Robin Titus or James Settlemeyer or Aaron Ford and Nicole Canizaro, I think we were able to sit down and have a common goal, and then we could focus on how to get there and mitigate, some, trouble along the way. Don't always agree. Governor Sandoval and I didn't always agree. Governor Sisolak and I didn't always agree. But we always sat down to talk about it, and I think that allowed for us to find common ground more often than not.
Nice. I try and always ask elected officials if there is a time when you realized you weren't just participating in the Nevada story, but you were helping shape it. And I don't know if it happened once you became an elected official, or was it the process of getting into running for office?
For me, really, it was more the calls that I got that were not public. It wasn't testimony. It was, Jason, you don't know me, but this bill really helped me. You don't even have to call me back, but thank you. Those are the voicemails that I keep. When I watch, Assembly Member Jovan Jackson, for example, serve, not recognizing when we restored the right to vote, we also restored the right to serve. And so he's there because of that. Those kind of behind the scene things, I think, are what really make it fulfilling and worthwhile. No matter what piece of legislation you pass, they can undo it in a couple of years. But if you do it with the best of intentions, and you uplift, I think, the integrity of the entire institution, you have a legacy that will outlive any bill that you pass.
And I know everybody, they want their bills to be passed. It's a whole process, 120-day sprint. You very fondly remember all of those. Was there a piece of legislation that you were particularly proud of?
I think the work that we've done to expand access to the polls, I think, has been incredibly valuable in the state, whether it's in the urban areas with polling sites and drop boxes, in the rural areas, ensuring that they had options, on tribal land, making sure that they had expanded options, without trying to direct people on how to vote, making sure that they have access to it and encourage them to participate civically in that way. That's one of the biggest things that I think I walked away being proud of.
Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate that, because if you don't give people opportunity, and look, we all get busy. Voting is something I think people want to do. It's just not at the forefront. They're worried about their groceries, right, their kids, their job, their everything. And so not only have you made it easier, and I really do appreciate that, because I took my cousin to vote for the first time, and it was a mobile site. And it was easy for her because that's where her job was. So right. I met her and we went and voted, and that was wonderful. Right. I voted on UNLV's campus one year. That was amazing. And I've done mail-in ballot because I was traveling, right, or whatever. And so I'm a product of easier voting, and I want to do it and seek it out. And so I know that's important. Our state needs to be represented by, the people that Nevadans actually want. Right. Making it easier is great.
Well, Nevada's unique. We have an urban core, and we have, another urban base in Washoe County, 500 miles away, but there's a lot of space in between. And we have to accommodate, populations that have different interests and different perspectives. And so it gives us, I think, a unique calling, but also a unique opportunity.
When you think about leadership, and certainly, there's been, staying with the voter registration and access, there's been some attacks on that as of late. But when you think about leadership, and, leadership shows up in different ways, what would you say to elected officials today, especially Secretary of State and the legislature, when voting is being attacked? Like, should they double down? Where do you think they should land on that?
Well, I think that all of us have a responsibility to ensure to the public that there's integrity in the process, that there's not, corruption going on. I think Nevada is unique, being so small, but we have some wonderful, representatives in, the registrar's offices throughout the state who have just done a phenomenal job. And I think we do have a responsibility to continue to assure the public that the process does have integrity and that there's not fraud going on. And I think, we have seen our public officials go out of their way to do that. If there are adjustments that need to be made, we should be open to it. I think there's a lot of attention around, some different approaches, whether it's IDs or, how you cast provisional ballots and all these other things. I think it is of the utmost importance that we make sure that the public has confidence in the process, and when we have to make adjustments, that we're willing to consider those.
I like that. So you've held roles, both that required both conviction and collaboration. And I'm curious how you decide when to push hard, when to kind of hold back, and when you have to lead with consensus.
That's tough. It's an individual approach. It depends on the issue. I actually have taken pride in having a measured approach in a lot of ways. It took 3 sessions to get voting rights restoration done. And, at one point, it was everybody except for category A and B felons. And then it was, look, everybody, if they've paid their debt to society and they've been released, we want them to be productive citizens. And so how can we reintegrate them into our society and make them feel valued so that they don't return to the system? So I have tried to take an approach that was on a case-by-case basis in that regard. There were very few issues where I was so convicted that I could not contemplate finding common ground. I think that's just in governing, especially when you have split leadership in a state like Nevada. I think you have to go in being willing to find that common ground and make some baby steps at times. Usually I think it's been rare that there's been an issue where I wasn't willing to take a measured approach. And some people are critical of that. Some people are like, let's just go hard every time and we might fail 5 times, but the 6th time we'll get it done. Whereas I've just firmly believed in making moderate progress as a better approach usually. There are just occasional times where you have to stand on principle and, go for it. And you lose some and you win some, and that's just the way that it goes.
How do you convey that to the public, the general public? Your constituents only read the headlines. Right. They see, something that didn't happen as a failure, or they get frustrated because it sounded nice. How do we, not just as elected officials, but as leaders in the state, convey that there is a process to everything and that everyone's trying to take a better approach?
Honestly, I think one of the most important things that public officials should do is be responsive and accessible. I think that goes a long way. Honestly, of all of the bills that I passed, one of the things that I did as a public official that got the biggest response was when I lost my election in 2014. And I sent my constituents a letter saying it was an honor to serve. I don't know what I'm doing next, but thank you for giving me this honor. In this community, I'll still be around. I'll see you around. Stay tuned. We'll see what happens next. Mm-hmm. I got a bigger response from that mail piece with people saying, you're not even asking for anything. You're not asking for a vote. You're not asking for anything than any of the other things that I had to do as a actually elected official. So, my staff would ask me at times if we were confronted with an issue and we didn't rehearse it or prepare for it, how you do it. And I said, look, all I have in me is, being genuine and being prepared as best as I can and having some coffee. If I focus on those 3 things, then at least I'm being the genuine me and I'm ready, and you don't have to worry about repeating something if it's not a lie, if it's just a genuine response.
And I'm sure that mailer was a good touch point to a community that you cared a lot about. And the fact that you weren't asking anything. And, I've had people talk about it's important to stay connected with the community. And that's just one way of doing that. I think a lot about that. I got lucky enough to get a 6-year term. I'm halfway through it. And I took a look at I was like, I haven't talked to some of these people since I needed them 3 years ago. And I've been very cognizant of that because I'm proud of what we're doing. But it is hard. It's hard because it's like, I want to tell you, but I don't want to brag. And I want to tell you, but I don't want to bother you.
Right.
But I can actually help you if you know about this. And so you just have to, like you said, be authentic. Do what works for you. And as long as you do that.
Well, and read people, read the room, understand relationships and communication. I had a constituent who lived next door when I first ran, and we are still occasionally in touch. And this was back in 2010. But when I moved, I let them know I'm running for office. I'm next door. I'm not going to bother you because you didn't choose this life, but I'm here if you ever have any questions. And so I told them I'd give them a break. I'm not going to be at your doors bothering you. I'm going to send you mail, but, once every year or two, we exchange. They still live there, and they really appreciated that I gave them space. But I also was responsive if they had something. So I think being your genuine self, recognizing that you have a responsibility because how you portray, yourself and how you conduct yourself is a representation on the entire institution and all electeds, and you have a responsibility to carry that and make sure you leave it better than you found it.
And I also think people are genuinely looking for genuineness.
I think so. A willingness to buck the system, a willingness to hold your own accountable. These are things that people aren't accustomed to. In leadership, I had to ask for several members' resignations because of conduct that wasn't appropriate. And I'm proud that if I'm not willing to ask my own to be accountable, I can't hold anybody else accountable.
Mm-hmm. And and it's probably even things that you did that nobody knows about, but you made the system better.
Right.
And I think that's kind of the secret sauce if you are lucky enough to be an elected official, that you're not going to get recognition for everything. But what you're doing in your heart is going to lead to a better outcome. And I think then you're successful whether you get reelected or not.
And not just elected life. I think public servants across the board. When I was a public defender and when I was a district attorney, I remember vividly having subjects who told me I was the first person who ever asked them what they wanted, how they felt. And then you do your job taking those individual circumstances into account. Those are the rewarding things that nobody talks about, but make your existence fulfilling. And regardless of where I am in the system, I have learned at this ripe age of 55 that you have to have purpose and fulfillment in your life, and find a way. And there are ways in the public and private sector to do that, but I think you lose sight, you lose vision, you lose focus if you don't find a way to have some kind of fulfillment.
Yeah, and I'm just like I'm categorizing that and I'm cataloging that, in my head, because you're totally right. Whether you're an elected or you're the soccer coach or you volunteer for the PTA, right? As long as you're loving what you're doing and your outcomes have the best intention, like, you're making the community better. You're changing people's lives, one little thing at a time.
And the community depends on people that committed. We can all go out and make a living. There are some folks that are more focused on finding that purpose and fulfillment than others, but the community is absolutely dependent on there being some of us who are just determined to give back.
Mm-hmm. I'm really big lately on the micro anything.
Right.
Micro expressions, micro just comments, like, what can I do little that really doesn't take much from me personally, but might make someone's day and change the course of their next hour, right? Like, what are the little things I can do? Because obviously the big things take time, energy, right, and not everybody has that. But I really do look at, like, we all live in a community. There's 2.4 million people here in Southern Nevada, 3.2 million in the state. How do we make Nevada better? I might not be able, I'm not the governor. I can't, make big changes. The legislature isn't in session. We're not putting the budgets together, but we are living day in and day out. And so maybe you can pick up a piece of trash that you found, small things.
Or just being responsive to folks. I have really enjoyed in this last cycle in government affairs during session, people pulling me aside for purposes that were not what I was being paid to do, advocate for, but they just said, Jason, how did this work when you were here? How can I be more effective at this? I care about that institution, and so I want them to do well. And that was the part of the most enjoyable thing I was able to do, is to still be able to mentor and help folks on issues that weren't related to any particular bill, but just how to be a better public servant, how to be a better public official.
Honestly, that's how I learned how to do everything I'm doing. I just watched other people, I asked questions, and I just said, hey, you're good at this, teach me. You made this decision. How did you come to that? And I think it's really great that we have people like you who are willing to mentor, because this world, especially if you don't have, like, I was a first gen everything, right? My parents weren't politically involved. They didn't go to school, nothing. But they loved me and they were giving me all the support, but that wasn't enough for me to break through. And so I had to ask people. And I owe Congresswoman Berkeley, now Mayor Berkeley, a lot. She invited me to a fundraiser. She'll never remember this, but I was 19. She invited me to go to one of her fundraisers, and I just watched how everybody held their wine and, did you eat and drink and talk to someone at the same time, or they did that in separate? Like, because I had just never been in those rooms before.
But you touch on it being first gen. It is very easy, and even for me, it's very easy to develop an imposter syndrome and feel like you don't belong, that you can't, compete. And you get in those rooms, and former President Obama said that you get in those rooms and you realize that, they may have been exposed to some things, but they're not better than you, and it doesn't make it unachievable for you. I've had the same experience and realized, if I'm asked to talk about my experience in certain ways, I realize all of these things are valuable and contribute just as much, and you do belong no matter what.
I'll tell you what, it has only taken me maybe the last 2 years for me to decide that I don't believe in imposter syndrome. Because, and I'll tell you why, I actually think imposter syndrome is everybody else trying to make you feel bad for taking up space.
No, I mean, look,
and I won't do that.
You mentioned earlier, if you see it, you can be it. I think if you take a deep breath and really look at the people who are doing some of the things that you aspire to do, they're just like you. And some of it is fear, some of it is insecurity, some of it is for lack of a better way of putting it, having haters. I mean, some of it is all of that. But I think for folks, in particular folks that have had challenging backgrounds that they've overcome, that experience is invaluable for other people to see and experience.
Yeah, and I love to hear people's stories too, because everybody comes to the table with different lived experiences, and yours and mine are going to be totally different. Right. But I need to understand your point of view. If I genuinely am empathetic towards coming to a conclusion that works for more than just me, I need to understand how other people are perceiving this.
Well, it goes back to we usually agree on where we want to go, just not how to get there. Mm-hmm. And as long as you approach it with that realization, I think we all are better off for it, and I think you get a richer outcome.
So you talked a little bit about probably young lobbyists coming up to you in the building and asking for advice. Do younger attorneys and public servants ask you for advice?
Absolutely, and I love it. I love going back to the law school to talk to students. Even when I was in Northern Nevada, when I worked at UNR, running the AmeriCorps program for a couple of cycles, serving at UNR as a recruitment retention coordinator, I was able to go out to college fairs and recruit kids. Some of those kids are now just as gray as me, and I remember them, and we stayed in touch. So across the board, I just did breakfast with law students not too long ago, and talked to them about their careers and asked them what they wanted to do. And in the same way that people offered up to be a reference for me, I offered to be a reference for them.
Is there a specific, like when you're telling your story, is there a specific chapter that you focus on? Was it like, maybe did you learn something in college that really set you on a good path? Was it your younger upbringing?
I would say in my professional career, there have been two pivots for me. The most recent was when the then Speaker Barbara Buckley called me out in front of hundreds of people and asked me when I was running for office. And you don't get that opportunity every day. And that really, really created a sense of urgency for me to focus. And ironically, when I got to know Kenny Gwynn on the Board of Regents, I was advocating, and they were going to raise student fees. And I asked him, because I saw the writing on the wall, if students support it, will you let us have a say in where it goes? And, he said, you're going to have a future in politics. And I'll never, ever forget that. And I wasn't thinking along those terms, but we ended up directing the money to the Student Health Service, hired some more nurses, decreased wait time in the Student Health Center. I never had to wait again. Mm-hmm. And I think, those are two big pivots in my career that created a sense of focus for me to really lean in.
I think it goes back to like the teachers and the mentors and the people in our lives that see something in us before we do, or we even think about it. And those people are just so invaluable. And
absolutely.
I personally try and, tell people when they've done a good job, or, I listened to someone give a speech. It was a student, and she was super nervous. She was a public comment. It was public comment. Mm-hmm. And I went up to her afterwards. I was like, don't you ever be nervous. You were wonderful. You were eloquent. You fit so much into a 2-minute speech, and I could tell it came from the heart. And she looked at me like, oh my God, like it was just because it matters, right? Like, right. I want to hear her voice.
Right.
So I'm glad that people did that for you. I think Absolutely. It's super important. So we talked a little bit about constituents only reading the headlines. Mm-hmm. And so if people only knew Nevada through the headlines, what would they completely miss about the people who actually live and work here and make it so wonderful?
I think what a lot of folks don't realize is Nevada has an incredible independent streak and independent spirit. I think that we, care about working families across the board, across the state. I think, whether they consider Nevada to be a purple state or not, my experience has been that people want down-to-earth people with common sense solutions. I think that's hard to really visualize if you don't know. I mean, people who don't know Nevada, in particular Las Vegas, think we're just the Strip. And they don't see the community here, and that we're in this together. Whether it's conserving water, whether it's providing opportunities for first gen students, whether it's expanding access to healthcare in the state, throughout the state. I think Nevada across the board has this huge independent spirit where Robin Titus and I can sit in a room and find some solutions. And I think that's just a micro example of what Nevada is. And I think that, there is one Nevada. And I love that I've, lived in both parts of the state and traveled in between because you get to see that firsthand.
I was just in Elko for Cowboy Poetry. Had an amazing time. And then I drove back from Elko straight south. And I just love going through these little towns. And I love it. And I want to do more road trips around Nevada. That's my plan, is because you're totally right. Like, every little community is special for its own reason. And their only thing they want is Nevada to flourish.
Well, to have been in every part of Nevada, from Las Vegas all the way up to the Idaho border in the tribal community of Owyhee, which I had never heard of before I moved to Nevada, and everywhere in between. The first time I drove to Elko, I saw the Ruby Mountains and almost had an accident. I was so blown away. Nevada, has a really rare beauty and an opportunity to recognize people from different parts of the state and what their priorities are.
Mm-hmm. And it is funny because obviously in Las Vegas, it's going to be very different than our folks in Winnemucca versus, even Genoa.
Right.
But it's so funny because we all come together in Carson City, and everybody from all over the state is lobbying for what they think the trajectory of the state will look like. And I take a moment always to be like, this is pretty special, because every single resident, the 3.2 million people, are going to be affected by what happens in this building.
Right. And I think people underestimate the impact that has on the whole state. It's unique. We have a citizens legislature where we meet for only 4 months every other year, and some of those dynamics, we don't stop needing schools and emergency rooms when the economy goes south, and so we have to find common ground. I think that makes us really unique.
Yeah, and always making sure that we're thinking about that North Star. Do you think your average elected is looking beyond their term, or? Being in the assembly, you're there for 2 years, and you have to get reelected if you want to stay, right? How hard do you think it is to say, hey, in 10 years, this will be better, and try and sell that to constituents?
I think it's easier to sell to constituents. I think with term limits and the demands of public service, it's more and more difficult to get people who are willing and able to serve to see it through. But I never did that job with an eye towards how it's going to, get me elected or not elected next time. You get elected, you have a term, and you do the best that you can do with that term. I think, I have been very focused on helping folks pivot from campaigning to governing and doing that job the way I watched it done before I served. I think a citizens legislature in particular, but public service across the board, I think requires it.
And sometimes that's hard. Some people can't make the transition.
Right.
Really good on the campaign trail. Hard time transitioning to the governing side.
Right. They can do a post on X, but genuinely getting in the weeds. And COVID was a valuable exercise for us because we were giving out food, and I have pictures of voters with masks on, just give me a thumbs up and saying thank you because we dropped off some food. I think it's just a reminder that we're in this together.
Yeah, it's because I think a lot about, obviously, I focus a lot on the higher ed institutions, and everything we're doing is about that upward mobility, that trajectory, what somebody's life will look like 10 years from now because if they have this degree, and did we make it accessible so they can also raise a family, work, and do all the things. And I think sometimes it's hard to get people, it's not my vision, but to buy into a greater vision because of what you just said, right? They're focused on, hey, I'm only here for this much time. I'm going to do as much good as we can. But it does take, and it takes the community caring about a long-term strategy.
Right. And you can't make it about you. Everything that I did in elected life and in public life, I did with a hope that somebody behind me would add on to it and make it better. It was never about me or about it. It was about, creating this path where we continue to do better for the community. And I think if you approach it that way, then you don't have to worry about if a certain number of bills passed or not. Sometimes just some of the most important things you do, your name wasn't even on it. Yeah. And I think that's a healthy way to think about it.
Yeah, I love that. As you look back on all the different chapters of your career, which role changed how you understood what Nevada truly needs from its leaders?
I think pivoting from being a public defender to a DA really gave me a greater sense of purpose in helping the system. Talking to people, whether they had mental health issues or just, poverty issues or education or lack thereof, recognizing on both sides. I had a professor in law school who told me if I was a prosecutor, I'd have a better impact on the system. And I didn't immediately buy it. And then I realized, absolutely, with my perspective and experience, having that balanced approach, you just have a greater opportunity, but a greater duty. And I've carried that with me from every public service experience that I've had.
What does a day in the life of a district attorney look like?
Wow. Well, I was in family court, so I was in child welfare, child abuse and neglect cases, which is really, really unique, where you really do have an opportunity to look at a family situation and collectively with all of the other partners try to look at what is in the child's best interest. Requires a lot of humility. I think the government has a big hammer, and you have to be responsible with it. And I had judges call me out and make sure that I recognize that hammer that we had and that I needed to deal with it responsibly. I think that pivot was really eye-opening for me, especially coming from Compton, where I had a different experience with law enforcement and perceptions. But I also had a brother who worked and came up through law enforcement. So I think, that pivot, I think gave me a greater calling of public service across the board.
Yeah. That was one of the courts I actually had the opportunity to visit, and I see how just day in and day out the children need some kind of adult to step in and give them kind of the just help towards the future. I think I have a couple of friends that are CASA volunteers. That's
incredibly important.
Yeah, that's in your they would have gone into your court, right?
Right.
And these are advocates for the child.
Right. I mean, and they were advocates for the child's best interest, and then you have legal aid that represents what the child actually wants, which frequently nobody ever listens to. And sometimes the children want something that's not in their best interest, but they still deserve to be heard.
Yeah.
And then you still have to look at the parents individually, not just collectively as a couple, but individually to make sure that you respect the child's, I think, interest in being in a family unit, a parent's interest and right to parent their children, but overall looking at the child's best interest and making sure that that child is on a trajectory where they don't come back through the system.
Yeah. I mean, it's super important that you get it right too, because they're building their foundation right in front of you.
Right.
And they need to know that there is an adult that's putting them on the right path, and they'll look back and know that they were taken care of.
Exactly.
It literally just warms my heart that, we have processes to help these kids, and it's really special. Thinking about the legislature and just now you're on the lobbying side. How has the legislature changed? And the reason why I'm framing this is because the first time I ever stepped foot in that building was maybe 2019. That's not true. I went up in college once or twice, but like really trying to lobby and but I look at that. I've only known this building for a couple of years. Right.
Well, I lobbied first for Clark County, so I kind of came in with a public service approach and an altruistic approach, protecting programming for local government, and then serving. And it's been an interesting pivot from serving to now advocating on the private side, especially because my experience is so recent. What has changed is fewer and fewer legislators are serving full 12-year terms. Fewer are able to because it's a big sacrifice, and there's a misconception about how much they get compensated for it. And you just have a high rate of turnover where it's just new people that need to learn how it works. That has been very, very different, I think, in recent cycles, even since I served and finished in 21. And so, it's a constant exercise in reminding folks of how the institution best works and how you can be most effective at it. But unlike most elected bodies, no one legislator can get anything done by themselves, and they need to, embrace a team approach, and make sure that it's a collective effort. So that continues. But I spent a lot of time mentoring legislators on the process and how it works, and put a lot of energy into trying to help them, know how to be effective in that role. That was something I wasn't being paid for. I wasn't advocating for a client. I just think it was something good for the institution that I continue to have a passion about.
When you were speaker, we saw exponential growth in the state, like hockey stick growth. Do you think now in 2026 we should have a citizen legislature?
I think that the fact that it's built into the Constitution, it's not going to change. I do think that there are ways and efforts to modernize it. There are times where it feels like we're a territory aspiring to become a state in how we operate, but it's because we have complicated aspects of our budget like mining and gaming and tourism that fluctuate when we don't stop needing schools and hospitals. And so, is there, a possibility of continuing, not necessarily going full-time and career, but maybe annual, maybe even a shorter session, and then like maybe we have 120 days every 2 years now. There have been discussions about going 90 days and then 45 and only handling budget issues in that off year. I think there are ways that we can maybe adapt to better serve our constituents through the hard times and through things like COVID and economic downturns. I think that we're going to have to at some point come to grips with making it something that average citizens, if we're going to call it a citizen legislature, something that an average citizen can actually afford. Because right now it's becoming increasingly difficult, and there's only independently wealthy people and people with limited life experience that can really have the flexibility to be able to afford it. And it makes it really, really difficult for a citizen, and this is a citizens legislature, to really serve and have a voice. So I think those are things that they have considered and they'll continue to consider. California's full-time legislature, I don't think that we need that, but I do think that we need to be flexible.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if we could do even every year just to, keep the wheels on the bus consistently. But honestly, it's increasing the pay. I mean, I'm not suggesting that they need to make hundreds of thousands of dollars, right, but I think you make $7,000.
Last I checked, they make about $9,000 once every 2 years.
Yeah.
And when you're gone for 4 months, you don't stop having rent or mortgage payment down here, but you're not getting paid in your day job. And then you still have to be able to raise money to be able to afford a rent, to rent a place in Carson City during session. So, the first time I served, I came home literally to the power company turning off my power when I drove up. And I said, I've been gone for 4 months. Just give me a chance. I'll go pay it right now. I've just been tied up. And he said, I'll finish my route. And if you paid it, by the time I'm done, we're good. And I went and paid it right away. But, those are challenges I don't think folks realize. And I didn't have any children at that time. I wasn't married. I didn't have any children at that time. So you can imagine how much more complicated it is for folks to have families to take care of.
Yeah, I've always looked at it. I mean, I think if we're going to expect people to give their all, we do need to compensate them a little bit more.
I think, and there was an effort last cycle to consider that. There's a concern about being perceived as giving yourself a raise, but there are ways. I mean, maybe they can do it and make it so it's not retroactive for current legislators, but for future legislators, for the good of the state as a whole. I do think something has to be done to make sure that we can continue to have citizens that reflect the citizenry actually serve.
Yeah, because I would love to, see the legislature have more people, have other voices represented. Like you said, there's a lot of independently wealthy, retired, and early stage, early career folks. And what we really need are the moms and dads who are, doing carpools and they're living day in and day out. We need to understand what they're seeing in the world, and they're subject matter experts in their own right. And we could really use more, actual, different industry sectors inside the legislature.
Agree 100%.
Honestly, across elected official boards.
Public and private sector. Yes. We need a balance of everything. But if we're going to advocate and represent, our constituents, we need to make sure that we reflect our constituents.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, because I've thought a lot about just where the future of Nevada is going. And I do think that, if we are going to entrust the two bodies to make laws and balance our budget, we gotta get the right people in there too.
Well, we do, but I also go back to my passionate about training up and mentoring policymakers, because there's not going to be an interest in expanding how much time they serve if there's not an investment in increasing the quality of their ability to do the job. And so I think we have to also make sure that we're training folks to be good legislators and good policymakers, so that there's confidence that expanding the amount of time they're up there is worthwhile and safe.
Yeah, I totally agree. You kind of touched on legacy earlier, but I want to think about your legacy and not just the titles and the positions that you've held. But what do you hope Nevadans feel was strengthened because you chose to serve?
I don't know that I look at it in that type of lens. I think, for me, it's really without any particular piece of legislation or policy, just upholding the integrity of the institution. But for me, my legacy, I hope, is going to be the doors that I've opened for other people to do what I did and twice as much. And I'll look back and be proud. I'm proud currently of the legislators that I recruited when I was still in that body. And I think, that's the best thing that you can do is open doors for other people to build on whatever you've done. My freshman year, I passed the Foster Child Bill of Rights, which was huge. But it was something that Barbara Buckley worked on for years. So it didn't start with me. But she opened that door and allowed me to have that path as one way that I could be successful. And so I think doing that for other people in the future, as the state changes, as politics change, I think is the best thing that we can do for the state.
Yeah, I really love that you were able to kind of carry the torch. Everybody's going to build a foundation. You hope it's sound, and then you hope the next generation understands where you were heading.
Right.
And then you can just keep building. And that's, I think, how we get successful. It's not these onesie twosies. It's not this, what have I done for me lately? But,
right.
How do I build off of the good work of other people?
Exactly. We were one of the first states to ban surprise emergency room billing. And I think the feds have since taken that up. I was able to get that done, but Maggie Carlton put in 12 years trying to get that done. So when we got it done, the first thing that I did is acknowledge that this was Maggie Carlton's baby. This wasn't just me. And again, people opening doors so that other people can do bigger and better things is great.
And I know the legislators codified quite a few things in the Constitution, which has protected a lot of Nevadans that they might not even know about. Right. But especially in an administration that is, so aggressive on kind of dismantling some of these things.
Right.
I think it's really wonderful, and I want people to know that the legislature has genuinely protected us in so many ways.
Well, I think regardless of which administration, I think there's a spirit of the states really being able to dictate how they move and how they operate, and protecting their own citizens' rights, and making sure that regardless of all the other changes, that states are stable and have a consistent approach. Every state, regardless of their philosophical leanings, every state, I think, is embracing that and, putting things that reflect, their state's priorities in a permanent, place for their state to be able to survive different administrative approaches.
Yeah, and I really like that Nevada, we still have that wild, wild west spirit to us.
Right.
And we've done a lot of firsts. First female majority legislature. Right. Also, just in my world, in the entrepreneurial space, we were the first one to codify the Office of Entrepreneurship at the state level.
Right.
And so we're investing in our entrepreneurs, and we're making sure that they have a voice inside government. And I just was this probably wasn't something that a lot of legislatures had thought about, or, why now? But it was like, yeah, but why not now? And I really just appreciated that.
Well, and I think, again, having an urban and a rural, component to our state, and having such transiency where people are coming and going, but being one of the best reflections of the entire country, demographically, I think, makes Nevada uniquely able to I think advocate and be forward thinking in policies that I think reflect that richness, and we just got to continue being Nevada.
The last thing I want to ask you, so the legislature, it can be a scary place for new people.
Right.
It's hard to break in, or however you want to say that, and you only have 120 days to do it right. What would you say to someone who maybe they're stepping into that building for the first time as, let's start with, as a constituent, and then maybe a legislator, and then as a lobbyist?
So I think as a constituent, it's really important, and it's on the legislature to also convey this to citizens, that these are neighbors of yours. These are regular human beings. They're not getting paid a great deal of money, and I think coming in with that understanding that they're just like you, they just had the ability and the flexibility to run and serve, I think would allow for, I think, more cordial and productive conversations. But being heard and making sure that your representatives know who you are, I think is important. As a legislator, I think it's important that folks don't let the title define them. You not only are you not greater because you're a legislator, you're lesser, you're a servant. You're there to serve other people. And so I think it's important that folks realize there was an institution here before I got here. It's going to be here long after I'm gone. And the best thing that I can do is be a solid caretaker for the role as a legislator and for the institution as a whole. The folks that think that they're greater because of it are the folks that end up either abusing it or getting in trouble. And that's just not a responsible way to handle the job. And as a lobbyist, I think it's important to remember that these folks are human beings, and they're not just, a spreadsheet with some checks that you write. Some of the most effective advocates for me were stakeholders that didn't write a single check. And so I think it's important that, you handle, that job with integrity, that you don't put policymakers in a compromising position, because even if you have a client to advocate for, you also have a state to live in. And that's a tough transition. And, for me to pivot from purely altruistic, I think, interest to representing clients, I'm fortunate I don't have any clients who, I vehemently disagree with or have an issue with. But it is an adjustment, and there's a balance. Still, look, the reality is in the lobby corps, there is a capitalist component to it. It's a business, and you have to run it. But you also have to be responsible for, what you might do, good or bad, to the institution when you have that, that checkbook.
Well, I really appreciate that advice. I know I'll take some of that to heart, and I plan on being up at the legislature at the next session, and obviously advocating for higher ed, but also just being a constituent and being a Nevadan that cares about the future. So I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate your service. I think across the board, public servants in Nevada do it because of truly wanting to make a difference. None of us are getting rich in that public service. And so thank you for even being willing to serve.
Well, I appreciate that. Before I let you go, I'm going to ask you a couple rapid fire questions.
Okay.
All right, first question. What's your favorite local restaurant?
Wow, my favorite, it's kind of cheating to say this, but my house. I bought a smoker before COVID, and I just have thoroughly enjoyed cooking for the family, and that is by far our family's favorite, is when we, take a weekend and smoke some ribs or something like that. That's just the first thing that comes to mind.
I love it. Shea Frierson. That's your
right.
That's your restaurant, Shea Frierson.
Right.
Must visit spot for newcomers.
To Nevada?
Mm-hmm.
There's so many. And obviously, the resort corridor has been really, really important for us. But I think it's important for folks to realize that that's not all of Nevada. I've thoroughly enjoyed going out to the dam and to Mount Charleston and to Lake Tahoe. I would say probably Lake Tahoe. It's so incredibly beautiful.
Well, what's the best outdoor activity?
I got this from current speaker who's not running again, Steve Yeager. But, we lived together for 3 sessions, and watching him explore the outdoors has created a new spirit in me. So this city boy loves throwing a fishing pole in the water at even something as small as Floyd Lamb State Park. Is my escape, and I still consider myself a desert rat that's mesmerized by any body of water, but that's my favorite. It's just some peace and having a pole in the water.
Like that. What's a hidden gem in Southern Nevada?
A hidden gem in Southern Nevada. I would say the culinary experience off the strip is something that people don't fully experience. So it's not one particular restaurant, but there are tons of really wonderful places to get really great food that I think most folks don't realize if you don't spend a little time here.
I completely agree. Do you have a go-to coffee shop?
Samba Latte on South Jones was, and they shut that location down, unfortunately. So I love Lemon Tree on South Buffalo, Lemon Tree Market on South Buffalo on 215. It's a little restaurant, but it's a coffee shop as well, and it's just a quaint, really, all the food is great, and the coffee there is great as well.
I'll have to try it out. What's your favorite place to unwind?
Probably Floyd Lamb State Park. I'd love it. I just it's just a piece that I have when I'm out there that I find it. That's other than my balcony, which when everybody goes to sleep, that's my piece.
Yeah. Well, what's the best view in the city?
You can't get away. The Strip is gorgeous. I am blown away every time I drive by that I live here. And, we don't spend that much time on the Strip, but obviously you have New York City and you have some other locations, but there's so many different places where you can see the Strip off the Strip, and I'm mesmerized by it to this day.
Yeah, just out here, I'll show you the view. It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
What's your favorite thing to do on a weekend?
My favorite thing to do on the weekends is cook. It's to use my smoker.
What is one must-have experience for visitors of Nevada?
At this point, I'd probably have to say the Spear. I've only been there a couple of times, but it is amazing.
I agree. What is the most underrated perk of living in Nevada?
Honestly, having family in Southern California, they cannot grasp the notion of living in a state that has no state income tax. And I try to tell, family, look at your paycheck and look at your state income tax and imagine keeping that with rent that's probably lower than what you're paying as well. I think, it's easy if you don't live here to overlook that. And, there's some pros and cons to not having a state income tax. But again, it's built in our Constitution. And so it is something that I think has been attractive to bringing more professionals here. Across the board, not just, above the line professionals, but, working families as well. I think it's a huge benefit that people don't realize until they get here.
I completely agree. I personally love it.
Yep.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for sitting down with me. I can tell you still very much care about this state, and I just thank you for all your work and dedication that you've given us. And it's undeniable that you've definitely helped shape where we're heading, and I just really appreciate the sacrifices you've made.
Well, thank you for the invite. It's just part of who I am, and I think as long as I'm continuing to find ways to find that fulfillment, I'll still be productive and have a meaningful purpose.
Well, I look forward to still seeing you up at the legislature, just on the other side of the dais.
Well, we'll see what the future holds.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening and being a part of the Homemeans community. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share with a friend, and check out our Nevada-inspired merch at homemeanspodcast.com. We'll be back soon with another story about the people who make Nevada feel like home. In the meantime, thank you for being part of the Homemeans community.